What would you do if the one who saved your life wasn't a doctor, wasn't a machine, but a four-legged friend who simply refused to give up on you? This is the story of Ethan Brooks, a police officer who was declared gone until his dog changed everything. Ethan was 35, strong, experienced, and respected. He'd spent over a decade on the force and had faced situations most people only see on the news. But on this quiet Tuesday evening, there were no sirens, no calls for help, no warning signs. He was home, finally off duty, sitting on his couch as the sun dipped below the horizon. At his feet lay Ranger, his German Shepherd partner of 6 years. Ranger wasn't just trained, he was devoted. Wherever Ethan went, Ranger watched. Not out of duty, but love. Then, without warning, Ethan felt dizzy. His chest tightened. His vision blurred. He tried to stand, tried to reach his phone. But his legs gave way. He collapsed to the floor. Ranger reacted instantly. Not with his usual bark, but with something urgent, desperate. He nudged Ethan with his nose, circled him, whined loudly. When Ethan didn't move, Ranger let out a long, haunting howl that echoed through the house and out into the street. A neighbor heard it and called emergency services, saying, "Something is wrong. That dog is begging for help." Paramedics arrived quickly. Ethan was barely breathing. His pulse was weak. They rushed him to the hospital while Ranger tried to follow, pulling against everyone who held him back. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Doctors ran tests, heart scans, blood work, oxygen, medication. Specialists filled the room: cardiology, neurology, internal medicine. They worked with focus and precision, doing everything they could, but nothing worked. Ethan's heart slowed. His breathing stopped. Monitors began to fall silent. The lead physician looked around the room and quietly said the words no one ever wants to hear: time of death. As the staff prepared to cover Ethan, a commotion broke out in the hallway. Ranger. No one knew how, but somehow he had tracked Ethan to the hospital. He barked and scratched at the door, refusing to leave. Security tried to guide him away, but Ranger wasn't aggressive, just desperate. Then, in a single unguarded moment, the door opened. Ranger ran straight into the room and leaped onto Ethan's bed. Everyone froze. The dog didn't growl, didn't panic. Instead, he began sniffing Ethan's arm, intensely whining, pawing, refusing to stop. A nurse leaned closer. "Do you smell that?" she asked quietly. They rolled up Ethan's sleeve. There was a tiny mark. Barely visible. Just a small discoloration. But it was spreading. The doctor's expression changed instantly. Earlier that day, Ethan and Ranger had responded to a routine call at a rural property. Nothing serious. Ethan remembered brushing his arm against something in a dark shed, but it hadn't hurt. He hadn't thought twice about it. What no one realized was that a rare toxin had entered his system, slow-acting, subtle, and difficult to detect. It mimicked natural cardiac failure, fooling even experienced professionals. Everyone had been looking at the machines. Ranger had been listening to instinct. The room came back to life. Doctors adjusted treatment, administered the correct countermeasures, and restarted support. Ranger stayed right beside Ethan, refusing to move. Then, a sound. A single beep, another. Ethan's heart began to respond. Minutes later, his chest rose on its own. Against all odds, he was back. Hours later, Ethan opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Ranger's face, tail wagging uncontrollably. "You stayed," Ethan whispered. Ranger rested his head beside him as if to say always. The story spread quickly. Not because of headlines, but because people needed to believe in something pure. When Ethan recovered, he asked to meet every doctor who had treated him. He thanked them all. "You did everything right," he said. "But sometimes the answer isn't in a machine. Sometimes it's in loyalty." Weeks later, Ethan returned to work. Ranger walked beside him, just as before, but now everyone who saw them understood something deeper. That bond wasn't just partnership. It was life itself. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle doesn't come from medicine, it comes from a heart that refuses to let go.